WJOPLP, Newburyport, Joppa Radio 96.3 FM. I'm going to go a little solo today, and it's probably a good thing because I have much on my mind, and some of the things I have on my mind I want to share with you. I hope you, the listener, will engage in terms of a narrative that I want to share with you, but also I hope you, as the listener, will again feel free to reach out to me. And reach out to me, especially as we really ponder the culture war that exists. You know, we're going to talk about the politics of DEI this evening. And DEI being diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the politics that's really taken hold, particularly of the ideological struggles that have continued to persist here in this country since George Floyd. Many of you may remember George Floyd, innocent black man, unarmed black man, who was choked, strangled, murdered by cops. And after white folks saw the injustice that transpired, they all took up arms saying, this is unbelievable. And I've addressed this on this show before. Many have come forward and said there has to be some semblance of some type of racial reckoning. And in the process of doing so, you saw legions of white folks moving forward to take arm about the injustices of structural racism. But yet, one of the things that we saw happening is the fact that as there's always progress, right? 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, there's going to be some type of narrative where people are going to resist any social progress. I don't want to get into a historical narrative because I can pontificate and go on for days about that. We saw that for a long period of time. We come to the end of slavery, we get to Reconstruction where there's progress, and then what followed? Jim Crow, right? We exit Jim Crow, not again until 1965, in which we continue to see the decades and decades of discriminatory and racist policies in the United States have an adverse effect on people of color, but particularly BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous people of color. Moving forward after the Civil Rights Movement, we've continued to see a stronghold happen, especially to women and queer folks. These are the things that happen when folks who were not at the Constitutional Convention, folks who didn't address the injustices and the makeup and the construction of a capitalist framework in this country continue to lose any type of authority or voice that they really never had as we move forward. That being the case, we've seen since George Floyd a number of parent groups, a number of parent organizations who have really kind of coalesced around this idea of rejecting any type of measures for diversity, equity, inclusion, anything dealing with anti-racism, anything dealing with social justice, or the framing of the injustices that have taken place. I think back to a couple stories that we've seen here. We've seen some college and universities, for example, where even parent organizations and student groups have mobilized to really push back against giving folks who've not had much of a voice, or really trying to silence that voice. Oftentimes really saying things such as, well, why do you have that kind of authority when we no longer have that authority? We've seen the semblance of white fear really come to fruition, starting back in, well, I mean, I would go back all the way to the election of Barack Obama, and yet I can pick other examples before that where people became nervous about the browning of America, the fact that by, I believe, roughly 2041, that white people for the first time in this country will be in the minority. And that strikes a large level of fear in the souls of those folks that's there. And so we bring things back to the classroom. And in a classroom over the years, you've seen parent groups and organizations really attack measures, good-hearted measures to inform and to educate students about the importance of being in spaces around folks who look different. But yet being in spaces around people who look different also means hearing their story and their narratives, the things that they experience that others may not experience. This measure, of course, the thinking about how do we diversify faculty in schools? How do we diversify our school boards? How do we diversify our students? How do we diversify the subject matter and the conversations that are happening in classes that oftentimes many people don't know? So a lot of initiatives were started. And in the process of these initiatives being started, the backlash became, that is too much. You know, talking about slavery to a third grader, we shouldn't talk about because slavery didn't exist. Or this idea that we shouldn't talk about the fact that we have gay students who are in first grade, second grade, third grade, right? These are the things that we're seeing happening in a lot of places. And those things make some folks nervous. I mean, I must confess, I should be more nervous than I am, but I'm not. I fortunately work and teach at an institution that is committed to anti-racism and social justice. We're committed to the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and yet in doing so, we want to engage all students in the narrative about why those conversations are important, particularly for white folks to hear. So, one of the things that's happening, particularly here in Newburyport, tomorrow, right? And I say this not to endorse this group. I say this out of concern. I say this in a sense that my heart is disappointed and broken, that these are the ways in which white supremacy operate. There's a group that is holding an event at the Elk Club here in Newburyport on Thursday, October 20th at 7 o'clock p.m. That group, of course, is known as Citizens for Responsible Education. One of the things that they noted, of course, is the fact that their event is about the question of what is social emotional learning. As they noted in the Newburyport Daily News, I quote, members of the group often create a discussion with the school committee feeling like their concerns were not being addressed. Those concerns include what they claim as or is an inappropriate focus on social issues and emotional learning over more traditional education, as well as inappropriate and sexually explicit books in school libraries. This is a group of folks, of parents, who are looking to remove textbooks out of schools. These are a group of people who are looking to remove books out of libraries, mainly because they believe that school is really only geared toward teaching the very basics of education. Now, don't get me wrong, right? You can't engage in deep methodical work if you don't have the basics of being able to read, being able to comprehend, being able to do mathematics, right? But yet, part of schooling is about socialization, the process or the processes of socialization. And when we think about social emotional learning, if you were going to operate in a way states like Texas, Texas is doing this, but Florida as well, then you have a problem. I'll give you an example. I think many of you are familiar with the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. And this idea in the state of Florida is the fact that they're going to treat relationships in a heteronormative way. That is, on walls and books, on pictures, you cannot have a gay couple holding hands. Because for some reason, they believe that little kids who are going to see pictures of a gay couple are going to just become gay all of a sudden. Now, I want you to think about that. If that's not the most idiotic and dumbest thing I've ever heard, then I don't know what is. In many ways, this is part of that white heteronormative masculinity that's looking to blind the identities of a large population of people, to silence them. And so one of the things that's going to take place tomorrow is that this group, according to its Facebook page, they state, I quote, looks to restore a healthy, non-political, right? Let me give you that. A healthy, non-political educational system that allows students to thrive socially and academically. It is opposed to the teaching instructing or training of any student in public K through 12 schools in Newburyport to adopt or believe concepts such as racism, sexism, and gender ideology. So, if that's the case, then the question that I am dying to ask a population of folks who really believe that racism doesn't exist, why is there such grand inequities and inequalities here in the 21st century that exist? The statistics on the level of police brutality is through the roof, and evidence illustrates that. We have countless amount of evidence that also showcases the fact that African American families, brown families, families of an ethnic racial descent who settle here continue to struggle ascertaining home ownership. Folks will just claim, well, they should have worked a little harder. They should have done this. They should have done that. But I don't really think that's the case. I think the reality, of course, is the fact that you have a population of folks who are doing the work of white supremacy. And here's what that work of white supremacy looks like. If white folks are going to be in a minority come 2041, then the job of what I would call right-wing ideological parents is to protect the notion of whiteness. That means, for example, making sure that they're raising kids to see whiteness, not so much as an identity, but as normative, as average, as a way of being. Seeing whiteness as not as a privilege, but seeing whiteness as a sense to be beholden. Everything tells us that whiteness is great. It's ubiquitous, and it really sets the stage for everything moving forward. Making sure that communities and schools stay homogenous. We don't want interracial dating or interracial marriage for that particular sense. Why? Because again, there are people who honestly believe that that dilutes and pollutes the racial gene pool that's in existence that's there. And I know folks are listening and you're saying, well, Eddie, brother, come on, man, that's a bit extreme. But there's merit to that, particularly when you're starting to see the fading or the declining of the great white race here in the 21st century. You know, I'll step on that just a little bit more if I have to, and really continue to talk about the fact that there is a fear of black and brown folks. Oftentimes people go into the ballot box making sure they're supporting candidates who will do the things to protect the identity of whiteness that exists. Moreover, if we're going to frame this, particularly thinking about the fact that racism doesn't exist, then we have to start with the textbooks. Many of you know, for example, in the state of Texas, the state legislature, for example, has banned and outlawed the use of the term slavery to all young school children, I think up to around the third grade or something like that. Feel free to fact check me on that, and I hope you'll do that always. There's this concern that if we continue to talk about the KKK as being a terrorist group, then that's an injustice in and of itself. In the state of Texas, you cannot call the KKK a terrorist group. Let me remind you folks, if you're thinking about this just for a second, if you can't call the KKK a terrorist group, then what do you call folks who drag black folks out of their home and lynch them? Right? They go to church on Sunday morning only to walk out of church and have a parade walking around a tree while a black person is sitting there being lynched with their eyeballs popping out. Whoa, that's gruesome, brother. I'm overwhelmed by that. No, that's just a reality and that's just a fact. That is what exists here, right? The fact, of course, that my blackness doesn't really mean anything because we're seeing notions of whiteness since to erase my blackness and all the struggles and all the labor that has come forth in that particular sense. Those are the things that are starting to transpire that's here. When you see populations of folks who are calling themselves citizens for responsible education, who believe that there should be no conversation about gender, any conversations about racial identity or sexual orientation, folks, there's only one way to call this, and that's to call it what it is, which is white supremacy. People will sit there and they'll claim, well, brother, I can point to a black person who agree with me. Oh, I'm sure you can. Absolutely. There have been Uncle Toms and black folks who've really adopted and inspired and brought forth white supremacy for a long period of time. This isn't anything new, people. This is just the norm that has really calculated the realities that take place here in the United States. And if we're going to pretend that these things don't exist, then we have a problem. We have a serious problem. Newburyport has a problem if it allows a group of folks to migrate in and dictate the fact that protecting the notion of whiteness at all costs is what's in their orientation. Pretending that racism doesn't exist. Man, folks, I call this common sense. Don't be stupid, right? This is commonsensical in so many ways. And for folks to deny anything else, that is them pretending and hiding behind their own notions of white supremacy. Oh, Brother Carson, are you calling me that? I'm asking you to think. I'm not saying anything else. I'm asking you to put down the Kool-Aid or whatever it is that you're drinking and to think about the problems that exist. And probably one of the reasons why over the longevity of the history of Newburyport, right? Because remember now, this community was constructed and built off slave labor. There weren't slaves here in Newburyport. Slaves didn't arrive. Slaves didn't land here in Newburyport. But the funding, the boat, the money from the rum, all of those things that were shipped down south, those are the things that took place that were there. Now, we're talking about things, for example, this group, they're worried about what is social emotional learning. Let's think about young kids who identify as queer. Young kids who may be thinking about the fact that they don't feel right in their body. They're in a place where they no longer want to be Charles, but maybe they want to be Charlotte, for example. And people are pushing back and saying that education in school is really conditioning folks to think in a way that they already think because that's their existence, and to deny their reality is doing greater damage. I challenge you to spend a little bit of time looking up the statistics on the suicide rate of queer kids in this country. Put that on your consciousness just for a second. Look at the rate in which young kids who have been forced to hide, live in a closet, to reject their identity, to struggle in oppressive homes, oppressive school systems, or oppressive communities, the damage that's happening to them. Right? It doesn't take a rocket scientist. It takes a couple keys, right? Hit a few buttons. Move off your Twitter page for a second where you're getting just, 140 characters, and read something a little bit more lengthy for that matter. And if you think I'm making this stuff up, then I welcome to have a conversation with you, because I'll tell you what, tomorrow night at the Elk Club at 7 o'clock here in Newburyport, I'm going to be there. And I'm going to be there because I'm going to walk in not under the sense that I want to be a troublemaker, because I'm not, because I'm just too smart for that. The reality is I walk into space because I'm a well-informed person, but I'm a person who loves people and don't believe in rejecting their identity, but also believe in the sense that if you want to love someone, you need to see them flourish in who they are and where they belong, making sure they have voice, agency, and they're being seen along the way. So I'm going to show up and I'm going to listen. And I'm going to listen. And I'm not showing up to support them, though I got to be honest, this is a group that's doing what right-wing folks do all the time, which is they're capitalizing off of you in terms of charging you $20 a ticket for their own fundraising that's taking place. Contradiction, call it for what it is, but I am going to pay that $20 because I need to be present. I need to be there. And trust me, when I hand them that $20, there's going to be a little note and a little love letter that's attached to it, making sure that I'm very, very clear about what I stand for, what righteous folks stand for, and why the fact that we're having such a conversation that's beneath all of us here in Newburyport. I hope the folks here in Newburyport will reject this conversation that's happening. I hope the folks in Newburyport will step back and they'll think about a couple things here. Couple points. My first point that folks need to think about: why is an outside group coming to this area of all areas to mobilize and cause trouble? I mean, that's what happens. Why are they coming here? Why are they declaring war on really a predominantly white community. I mean, there are not a lot of people of color that's here. Because again, this is for the sanctity of the purity of whiteness. That's why they're here. They're looking for these enclaves of places in which they believe they can reach some folks who may not be super informed. You know, that's the first thing, and that's the problem. The second thing I think people need to think about when they think about this group that's coming here is what kind of damage are they going to do to your kids and to your community when they try to inform the curriculum about how folks should exist, right? For those of you out there who have a trans son, trans daughter, or a transgender non-binary identifying person, or a gay son or daughter, right? Or just a gender non-binary person in general, as someone who identifies is pansexual, someone who just loves all people. What kind of damage is that going to do when your kids don't see themselves in school and in a curriculum? When they go to school every day and the only thing they hear about is Jennifer and Bobby. This is what's normal. Jennifer and Bobby, they fell in love on a school ground. They grew up together, and Jennifer and Bobby, they had children. They bought a big, nice house here in Newburyport, and they lived, I don't know, forever after or whatever comes forward to. What damage does that say to folks when little kids look at that and then they start looking at themselves and then they ask themselves, what is wrong with me? They hate themselves. They do damage to themselves. They question their identity that exists, right? They're ashamed to be who they are because everything that schools teach them tells them that there's something wrong with them for being queer, because schools can't inform in a proper way that identities matter and that we don't live in a world that is purely heteronormative. Those are the things I think people need to ask themselves. The last thing I'd ask folks to think about too is, what does that mean for Newburyport when a group such as this are looking to come to your town, your community, and make you another segment of Fox News, where people are going to start talking about Newburyport in a particular way that makes them question whether or not this is the kind of community they want to be a part of, right? These are the conversations that I would be asking. If I'm you, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, these are the people I don't want here. We're doing things the right way, and we have a lot of work to do here. We're not super diverse. We're trying to attract folks here. Newburyport's not a cheap place to live. We want to be wholly inclusive, but yet by taking a step backwards, by even pretending to welcome a group like this into the fold, only creates further damage. And not only that, it's going to give you a reputation. People are going to talk about you around the state, and if you happen to fall on Tucker Carlson's show, people are going to sit there and think, well, gee, Newburyport's not really the kind of place that I feel welcome at, and that's not the kind of place that I want to be. But you know what? Let me say this about Newburyport, and I'm going to be honest with you. I think this group is going to show up. They're going to have their meeting, and a vast, overwhelming majority of citizens in Newburyport are going to reject them because they are not even from here. Many of you are going to be curious. There's nothing wrong with that. You should be curious. Hey, hear them out and be concerned about some of the things they're looking to propagate. That's okay. But yet, I know the folks here in Newburyport recognize that this is a bastion of a community that professes radical love. It understands that there are not a lot of black and brown folks here, but you're going to try to love those folks much in the way that I've seen some love here. You're going to love folks who identify as queer. You're going to recognize the realities and the exploitation of women and their experiences, and the fact that this group wants to deny the inequities that exist between those who identify as male and those who identify as female in this country. So that's where my faith is. That's what I'm confident in. And that I feel really, really good that that's going to happen. And you know why? Because I'll share something that I got yesterday. I received an email, because if you know me, I always show up. And when people lean on me and they call and they ask me to show up to something, I'm going to do that no matter what. And so there's a message that's circulating on some social media pages, through some emails, and it reads, who are the folks working together to undermine our school and our educators here in Newburyport? People affiliated with the Koch brothers. Focus on the family. And if you don't know about the Koch brothers or Focus on the Family, then I encourage you to look them up. The Family Research Council. And of course, these groups claim that the 2020 election of Joe Biden, right? Not getting into Joe Biden, whether you support him or not. The fact that they claimed that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump and handed to Joe Biden. So these are the kind of people we're talking about who are showing up here. People from outside of Newburyport, including an activist from Tennessee who travels the country attacking school systems and educators. That is the particular purpose in the agenda, is to find communities like Newburyport and then to target them, to go after them, and to really make them into a case study about what I would call a radical right-wing message out of fear of the demise of whiteness here in the 21st century. This group, these people, they have political agendas. So let's just be honest. We all have political agendas, folks. I'm transparent. I have a political agenda. You know, if you've listened to this show, if you know me, you know, my biggest political agenda is the fact that I'm about radical love. I'm going to love you no matter what. If you love other folks and you treat them the right way, I don't care if you're gay, trans, black, brown, indigenous, Asian, immigrant, white, a sister, brother, it doesn't matter, right? I'm going to do that, and that's the kind of community that needs to exist. But this group, of course, these people have a political agenda. They want to roll back women's rights, and we've seen quite a bit of that transpiring since the Supreme Court's decision this summer. Seeking to discriminate against LGBTQ folks. Well, that's already starting when you're starting to tell kids in school that your queerness, your identity doesn't matter. Not even thinking about the fact that they're not trained to engage in conversations about the importance of making folks feel healthy about who they are and how they identify. So here's what I'm going to ask folks to do. Tomorrow, October 20th, from 5:30 to 7 o'clock p.m., there's going to be a peaceful and positive rally to support our schools and our community here in Newburyport. I'm asking that you show up to that. And while I'm going to show up to it, but I'm also going to show up at the Elks Club to see what this radical group has to say, I ask that you show up and you support Newburyport, you support teachers, you support schools, you support educators who are really professing the fact that we should exist in a way in which our identities are affirmed and reaffirmed. Where is this going to take place? 25 Low Street, along the sidewalk, not interfering with folks going in and out of the Elks Club parking lot. So right outside of that parking lot, this is where this is going to take place. 5:30 to 7, right? Tomorrow, October 20th. Here's what you should bring. Bring positive signs, folks. Check this out. A group organizing this, they're asking that you do not bring negative, ugly, hateful signs because, see, groups like this is what they want. They want to point out, look at these radical leftists who want to give gay people rights, want to give black people rights, want to give queer folks rights, and look at them. That's what's happening to this country. This is why we're seeing a deterioration of family values, whatever that's supposed to mean. Those are some of the things that are going to transpire here. So, positive signs. Signs such as, we support our students, right? Come out with some of those signs. We support our students. We support our teachers. We support the schools that our students deserve. We support living in a diverse, equitable community in which we can love the identities that exist. And how do you love folks, people? Well, I'm going to tell you. I hear from folks all the time, Brother Carson, I love you. Do you? Because, see, the last time I checked, you disavow my identity. You disavow the experiences of people who look like me when they've run into experiences, whether it's related to being pulled over, being profiled, being discriminated against in stores. Have you ever had someone follow you in a store? I can tell you a lot of stories about that, right? And there are folks who will say, well, Eddie, I'm sorry about that, my friend. I love you, and I'm going to walk side by side, and I'm going to hear your story because I know this is painful, and it breaks your soul, and it breaks your heart. But I'm going to tell you, Eddie, this is what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to reject the fact that this is your experience. I'm going to hear you out. And so showing up tomorrow is about showing up for the identities of those folks that we love in this community. Not showing up is not a rejection of that, but showing up to support a group. I can never remember the name of them here, and nor is that really important, to be honest with you. A group called, I don't know, the Council of Parents or whatever they may be. That's not what we're going to do whatsoever. Folks, I can go on and on and on. I got a lot to say when I talk about the politics of DEI, talk about my concern that's happening here. But I'm going to tell you what. I'm always looking for folks who show up to support what's good and not to support things that clearly have an ulterior motive. I don't have an ulterior motive. My motive is to love radically, to support, and to endorse. That should be your motive. There's no political. What is political about being gay, people? What is political about that? Help me understand. What is political by the fact that I'm a black man in the U.S. and I've experienced different things. My mother lived in the Jim Crow South, and if you ever want to hear her story, why don't you check out our conversation here on the show, Race Matters. And that's an enlightening one. What is political about the fact that people want to pretend that race and racism doesn't exist, erasing the experiences and the history that has transformed and really constructed this country? See, one of the things I'll say is this. Could you ever imagine being Jewish and walking in a park and seeing a statue of Adolf Hitler? And beside that statue, it talks about he represents the great German heritage of the people. And that's why we celebrate him. It's important that we see him and we celebrate him in a park. When you're someone who lost essentially just about everyone who belonged to the Jewish population at one point. All right. How am I supposed to feel when I walk in a park and I see Robert E. Lee in that statue, and we're supposed to endorse this, but yet I remind myself that Robert E. Lee fought for the Confederacy in a way to keep me enslaved? Those are the things that we have to think about. And I only ask that you do the same thing. One more time, people. Tomorrow, the address again is 25 Low Street along the sidewalk, right out by the Elks Club parking lot. This is going to take place from 5:30 to 7 o'clock. Make sure you bring positive signs supporting teachers, supporting students, supporting radical love, supporting all the good things that really adds value to the community of Newburyport. I will be out there. But I'm also going to enter that space too, because trust me, I'm the kind of face that needs to be there, because we all know that I'm super informed and I'm not perfect. But I always show up, and I hope you'll show up too. Folks, thanks for listening to Race Matter here at WJOPLP Newburyport. Joppa Radio 96.3. I'm just giving you a little radical love tonight because that's what I do and that's what I believe in and that's what I profess because somebody loved me. And because somebody loved me, I'm here letting folks know that I love them, particularly those who are living on the margins, women, queer folks, black and brown, indigenous, and immigrants. And if you love those folks the way I love those folks, and this is true for my white brothers and sisters and queer folks as well, right? That's the thing that we do. Let's not let outsiders take over this town and make us just another storyline for Fox News. Race Matters, folks. I'm out. Be well.